Hello, my hoopy fruits. I feel like I have not talked about books in forever. So I wanted to do a recap of the last 10 books I read. If I mention an arc, I got it from NetGalley, and I will try to remember NetGalley and the publisher to properly credit them so as to keep in line with the FTC. The first one would be Monsters Playthings by C.R. Jane and Mila Young. Um, this was monster erotica. Um, a young woman is institutionalized and she starts having these fantasies about having sex with monsters, basically. And then she goes on medication and it goes away. Then she gets out and it comes back and it turns out, what do you know? It's not a fantasy. Um, so this actually is a fantasy and erotica. It's just honestly not really well written, and it kind of comes off as somebody's like, "Oh my gosh, I am so dark and edgy." Oh. That kind of thing, and that just doesn't really appeal to me. I'm sure that somebody might like it. There were some interesting things about it, like, and I could have done with the more of the world building, because that's the part that I actually felt more interesting than the sex, which was just kind of like, ooh, I have a tail, ooh, I'm dominant, and by dominant basically being a jerk. um so there was a sequel because I was kind of interested in see how it was going, and in the sequel there's world building, really interesting world building that I liked. So the sex was kind of like meh, and then I got to the end, and the main character, whose name I can't even remember right now, and the monster dude are going at it, and so like he's like, "I can't wait to put a baby in your tummy," and I was like, "No, nope, nope." Any goodwill lost. Tummy? I'm sorry, the word tummy does not belong in erotica, in my opinion. You can have a totally different opinion if you want, that's fine. But no, not appropriate for erotica. So I gave both of those 2 stars. There Will Come a Darkness by Katie Rose Poole. Now, this wasn't bad, it just wasn't that good, and there were so many interesting things about it that I wanted it to like it more than I actually did. So I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that, like, the writing is interesting, so I want to read something else by the author to make a full judgment, because there's oftentimes when I'm reading a book and I'm just not in the right headspace for it to appreciate it. And like later I'll read it. This is what happened to me with The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Like when I first read it, I hated it. And then like a couple years later, I read it and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing. I missed out on so much by not reading it." So, I think I'll give the second book a chance, but I gave it a 3 stars because it's not a bad book. It just wasn't that interesting to me. And honestly, it is a YA book, so it's not for me. Like, I'm not the target audience. So that may have something to do with it. Third book in the Fearless series, Run by Francine Pascal. So, um, you know what? I just realized that I completely just glossed over the plot of There Will Come a Darkness. Okay, so there's this prophecy that there will come a darkness. I mean, shocking, I know, but it focuses on like 3 or 4 different characters, and one of them is the prophet who will save the world. There's one of them who's supposed to end the world, And see, I can't even really remember it, so I'm not sure if my grade for it is actually giving this book the justice it deserves. Um, but see, that plot to me sounded very interesting, but actually reading it through it, there's some stuff about religious persecution, which is actually really interesting, but it was just kind of like meh. Next one is Run by Francine Pascal. It's the third book in the Fearless series, and in the last book, Sam was kidnapped by the evil Loki. Yes, this this series is like so much fun because like the more I read it as I'm older, it's like, of course the villain would call himself Loki. That makes perfect sense. Um, only Sam's a diabetic. He doesn't have access to his medicine, so basically he is dying, and Gaia is tasked with doing all these horrible things. Like there's a sex tape of Heather and Sam's first time that is played in front of an entire classroom. You can imagine how well that goes. Was like one where she was tasked with robbing someone. She had to go through all these horrible things that were just like, is this really worth Sam? But anyway, Sam gets rescued, and then there's on to the next thing, which if I remember correctly, I think it's David, but I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure that that's what sucks. Anyway, the Fearless series is a wild ride. It's about a girl who is born without the fear gene, and her mother died, and her father left her, and she thinks he abandoned her, but really he's been watching out for her ever since her mom died, and his twin brother is evil because, of course, there's an evil twin in a Francine Pascal series, and it's a wild ride. It's a lot of fun. There was a TV show which I think starred Rachel Lee Cook as Gaia, which is just bizarre casting to me because I love Rachel Lee Cook, but she does not seem like the buff Gaia. Like Gaia is like really tall. She's basically what you'd call a muscle mommy, only she's like 17, so ew. But like that's the only way I could describe of like how she would look. Like this girl is ripped, but she has a lot of insecurity about it because at the time the books were written, the thing was, like really thin and super feminine and stuff like that. So like for that she's like not like other girls, but like in a real way that she's not like other girls because she feels like a completely different species. So that was a fun throwback read. Imaginary Mary by Jody Meadows, Brody Ashton, and Cynthia Hand. This is the fifth book in the series, and My Lady Jane, the show, is coming out in like a week. So that's super exciting. Um, this one is the story of Mary Shelley, only it's not Mary Shelley because this is an alternate version of history. And in this book, Mary does not write the book. She does, however, create life. And she's not a horrible douchebag about it like Victor Frankenstein. So it's just, this series is so much fun. Um, it's got kind of like a modern sensibility, like giving justice to these women in history so that they could lead good lives. Like My Lady Jane is about Jane Grey, who was queen for 9 days and then she was beheaded. That doesn't happen in the book. And there's one about Jane Eyre and Calamity Jane and Mary Queen of Scots. And they're just so much fun, and I would highly recommend them. The Prince and the Apocalypse. This was a NetGalley book. Thank you to NetGalley. Um, This book is about a girl named Ren. She is taking a trip to England because her sister did, and she wants to do what her sister did to make her family happy. On the way, she goes to eat breakfast, only the place is closed down. She runs into the Prince of Wales, which in my review on Goodreads, I put as Whales because it autocorrected, and I kept that because I imagined that the Prince of Wales was very funny. Um, but anyway, so they want to go back, but unfortunately she can't because it turns out that in 8 days a comet is scheduled to hit the Earth and destroy it, which, as you can imagine, would just ruin anybody's day. So she ends up in contact with the prince, and they have a madcap adventure across Europe trying to get back to her family, and he just wants to go away because he's had enough of royalty. And what happens is a great romantic comedy. There's a dog, because in a romantic comedy there should always be a lovable animal companion. I feel that that's necessary. It doesn't have to be a dog, it doesn't even have to be a mammal. It has to be lovable and an animal. That's it. Those are the rules. My role. The next one was Alice by J.M. Sullivan, who wrote the Neverland Transmissions, which I think I gave every book in that series a 5 stars because they were just that entertaining. But this one was kind of like, it had some really interesting ideas, but it's just something about it didn't do it for me, and it might just be because this was before the Neverland Transmissions and J.M. Sullivan was refining her skills as a writer. But it just, it was okay. Ended on a cliffhanger, but like, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I have to know what happens next the way I was with the Neverland Transmissions. So, eh. The next one is Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. This one hasn't come out yet. This one is coming out July 9th, and it is a trauma informed nightmare of a book. It is so good. So, what happens is that this creator, writer, director, Misha, who, by the way, yes, the character is a reference to Misha Collins from Supernatural, is brought in by the studio, and the studio has to have a talk with them. See, because the characters, which he's been like finessing this relationship for years between these two female characters. Well, the algorithm doesn't like that, so he's gonna have to kill off the gay characters. And he's like, no. He's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And the guy's like, come on. And he's just like, no, not gonna happen. I've put my life into this. And then a piano drops on the guy's head, which is just like so Chuck Tingle to have something like that absurd happening, but then like actually take it like completely seriously and play it straight is something like really horrifying and alarming. Because, like this guy just gets splatted. And it's just a fantastic book. And there's some like really nightmarish and horrifying visuals, like just mental images. The one with the lamb. I'm not gonna say anything about Ignore, but that lamb, I'm not gonna trust farm animals that quickly. Stay away from me, lamb chop. Anyway, it was a fantastic book, and the way that they defeated the antagonist is just it's perfect. It's brilliant, it's topical. I just I loved this book so much. I might even like it more than Camp Damascus, and I loved Camp Damascus. Amazing books, amazing author. This was a NetGalley book too. Unbreakable Desires by Tanya Lynn. I actually met Tanya Lynn on Threads, and she said that she had a book coming out, and she was like, here's the arc sign up. So I was like, that sounds great. And the cover was adorable. And it's about an orc kraken who I decided would be called an orkin. It sounds like organ, and that's very funny because this is monster erotica too. And organ, like penis. See, I have a great sense of humor. Haha. Anyway, this one is about a woman named Brooke. She's kind of like the outcast of her family, but it's okay because her family is absolutely awful. Um, but anyway, the love interest, Russell, is pretty much the last of the orc kraken hybrids, and well, he can't really find someone to, carry on his bloodline, so he feels very lost and alone. And then suddenly he hears something or he feels something that he felt years ago. And yep, it's Miss Burke. And if you don't like insta love, you're gonna hate this book. Well, actually, it's a novella, but it's so much fun. Turns out that Russell is part of a group that fights off the evil rich elites who are making deals with demons and stealing the souls of children. So, like, really bad people and some pretty high stakes. But the romance is really cute. The sex scenes were really interesting due to, like, Russell being 30 feet long. It's like part of it was like, okay, how is this size difference gonna work? Exactly. And apparently for Brooks it works just peachy. So yay! Merriness spread throughout the land. There apparently, which is the sequel to The Prince and the Apocalypse. So surprise! The apocalypse didn't happen. The earth didn't go splitty. Yay! Which is not great for Ren because technically she and Theo, the prince, well, now he's a king because his mother died. The prince, well, she and the prince, they got married. It's a long story, and I don't want to go into too much detail because, like, that's enough of a spoiler for the first book. But, I mean, the fact that there's a second book kind of lets you know that the apocalypse didn't happen. She finds out the prince is going to be in Canada, and under the excuse that she just wants Comet the Apocalypse dog back, she goes out from Chicago to Canada to see him. And then everything goes wrong. Long story short, they are on a plane that crashes on a volcanic island. Yep, it's this poor girl, like, disaster follows her wherever she goes. So, yeah, those are the last 10 books I've read.